So it's been about 25 years, 26, 27, since my very first recording. My first recording was a solo piano record made in Cambridge, Massachusetts, under the guidance of Paul Bley, and it was an album called Shapes, and it was an album of complete improvisations. Um, had a beautiful Hamburg Steinway to record on, and just an amazing experience. And that's, well, I guess that's a quarter of a century ago. And so I've done plenty of solo things over the years, and I've played lots of solo performances and made solo sort of recordings, but nothing official. So I thought it was a time. It felt like after a full year of sitting in my basement and playing, all by myself, I figured, well, let's just go make a record. And so, and for those that followed me at all during the initial, I guess, 6 months of the pandemic, I posted probably close to about 80 or 90 improvisations that I did every day. It just became sort of my way of dealing and coping. One of the things that this pandemic has caused me is, or most musicians, I'd imagine, is sort of to really stop and think about why they play music in the first place. And one of the realizations that I came to pretty quickly on was that I think I always felt as though being a musician, I was doing something good for people. People would go out on a Friday or Saturday night to go hear some music, and well, they'd come and hear me maybe, and they would come up to me at the end of the night and say, thank you so much, I really enjoyed that. Or every now and then you see a tear if I play a really good ballad or whatever. So I figured, I always felt that playing music was sort of a righteous, positive thing to do to help people sort of deal with their everyday lives and the stresses of daily life. Little did we realize, or little did I ever know, that it would be completely snatched away for the better part of a year so far. So I thought, maybe it's time to go re-examine the solo piano record since I had done so many of these improvisations over this year. And so I did. And so Jim McGee out at Spectre Sound Studio is one of my favorite engineers and favorite studios to record at, and he has a beautiful instrument. And so I booked a time, and I didn't give myself much lead time, which I generally don't. I don't like to think about it too much. I just want to sit down and let it happen. And so the story of the day was quite amazing. I drove out there, and we were very smart with masking up and all that good stuff. And I get to the studio, and I sat down at the piano and just sort of played a little something. And then Jim and I discussed a couple of reverb settings and which mics we were going to use. And I walked back into the studio, kicked off my shoes, took off the sweatshirt I was wearing, took a sip of water, and took a deep breath and began to play. Well, it went for a while. I was just doing piece after piece, feeling really good about it. And at some point in time, I guess I thought, all right, maybe I should just take a little break. And I had no concept of how long I had recorded. And I looked up and I saw Jim through the recording booth, and I said, Jim, how much is that? And he said, you just played straight for about an hour. And I was sort of flabbergasted. I really couldn't believe that I had sat there for an hour and just played these pieces. And I told somebody afterwards, I told a student of mine that I said it felt like the rush of emotions that one feels when you see a dear old friend after a long, long period of time, or a family member, or whatever the case may be. And it was quite amazing. I sat there with those headphones on and the beautiful reverb setting we got and this piano, and it was just, the final track on the record I named my favorite place. And I must admit, there's really nothing better for me than just a beautiful grand piano and a nice sound. So that's what I did. I went in and I recorded just piece after piece, and some pretty miraculous things happened, or at least surprises for me. I welcome those things. Sometimes things just sort of start coming out, and I'm like, oh. So two things that ended up happening on this disc, which I really had no intention of, although it's no surprise. During this pandemic, during the past year, two really important musicians for me passed away. The first of which was Harold Budd. I've been listening to Harold Budd and Brian Eno's music for years and years, and just always been a huge source of inspiration. So he passed away, and then also Frank Kimbrough. And for anyone that doesn't know Frank Kimbrough's music, please go check him out. He's just one of the most beautiful lyrical piano players I've ever heard. And I had the pleasure of meeting him when I was very young, and he was always very enthusiastic and just a really warm guy. And funny enough, we actually studied, I believe, with the same piano teacher at one point in time in college. But anyway, he sadly passed away very suddenly, and I was very upset about that because he's always been important, at least musically and whatnot in my life. And so a piece sort of emerged as I was playing that was sort of a bluesier type thing, and I don't normally do those kind of things. I mean, I can and I do in other settings, but when I'm doing improv music, I tend to stick to sort of a more modern classical type thing or whatever it is I do. And anyway, but this blues thing came out because Frank had a lot of blues in his playing, and I began to sort of, as the piece went on, I felt like this is sort of what I was doing. Anyway, yeah, so this is the record, and I'm really excited about it. All the photography is all of my own. I have this thing for the tops of trees, and every time we go to North Carolina, we're up in the mountains, and I tend to take photographs of the tops of the trees. Anyway, I'm really excited about it, and I do hope you give it a listen. I think a few people, a good friend of mine said that it sort of touches upon a lot of different types of improvisation. There's some very melodic things on here. There's some very jolting and perhaps atonal or whatever the word is you want to think of. And then just some other very melodic and very, I guess, emotional or whatever the word may be. I must admit, after not being around, musicians and performing in front of an audience for a year, it's changed me, and I'm sure it's changed most people that are used to doing it on a regular basis. So anyway, I'm very excited about this. I believe this will be. I think it's just a really good record. I'm really very proud of it. I did write on this. The music on this record was recorded spontaneously in one sitting. I have left the original order in which they recorded so you may enjoy the experience as I did in discovering them. And that's really what I'm hoping people get out of it. It was an experience for me. It was an hour of my time that wrapped up what I felt like was probably the last year. So anyway, breathe in. It will be widely available very soon. But I'm just really excited, and I hope people take the chance to check it out. Thanks so much.